Hello, this is the news bulletin from SABA satellite channel live from Marib. Here are tonight's top stories. 6 Houthi ballistic missiles strike Mocha city and port, setting 2 cargo ships ablaze. International community warns the Houthi escalation threatens Yemen peace process, regional security and humanitarian stability. Also, Armed Forces spokesperson warns of decisive response to Houthi attack on Mocha port. Welcome back. President of the Presidential Leadership Council, Dr. Rashad Al-Alimi, has sent two separate congratulatory messages to Indonesian President Prabowo Subianto and South Korean President Lee Jae-myung on the anniversaries of their country's independence. In his message to President Subianto, Al-Alimi, on behalf of himself, the Presidential Leadership Council and the Yemeni government, expressed his best wishes for the Indonesian president's continued health and happiness. He also wished the Indonesian government and people further progress, prosperity and development, expressing hope for continued growth in the long-standing bilateral relations between Yemen and Indonesia. Al-Alimi conveyed similar greetings to South Korean President Lee Jae-myung, extending his best wishes for continued health and happiness. He also wished the South Korean government and people further progress and prosperity, while expressing hope that bilateral relations between Yemen and South Korea would continue to grow and develop. Houthi terrorist militias have renewed attacks on Mocha city and its port in western Taiz, firing 6 ballistic missiles in an escalation that threatens civilian safety and international maritime trade. Military sources said the strikes triggered fires aboard 2 vessels carrying commercial goods for traders in Mocha, while successive explosions were heard across the city and surrounding areas. The attack also reportedly targeted emergency responders. According to the sources, the final missile struck rescue teams as they were attempting to search or to reach the site and assist those affected, causing casualties among the responders and hampering efforts to evacuate the wounded. The latest attack comes after previous Houthi strikes on Mocha port and other critical facilities, raising further concerns over the safety of civilian infrastructure and commercial shipping along Yemen's western coast. The repeated targeting of a port near the strategic Bab el-Mandeb Strait adds to concern over the widening impact of Yemen's conflict on maritime trade and regional security. A senior official in the Presidential Leadership Council has warned that continued Houthi attacks on ports, civilian and economic infrastructure, and international shipping routes will face a tough response. The official said the government will act under its constitutional and sovereign responsibilities to protect civilians, vital infrastructure, and Yemen's national interest, while the armed forces will take legitimate measures to deter sources of threat. He held the Houthis fully responsible for the consequences of their escalating attacks, particularly repeated strikes on Mocha port, which he warned could have serious humanitarian consequences by disrupting supplies of food, medicine, fuel, and essential goods to millions of Yemenis. He called for collective regional and international action to protect commercial ports, cargo ships, and freedom of navigation in the Red Sea and Bab el-Mandeb Strait, warning against allowing Yemen to become a platform for threats to global trade routes. The United States, United Kingdom, Bahrain, Pakistan, and the African Group have warned the UN Security Council that renewed Houthi attacks are threatening Yemen's peace process, regional stability, and freedom of navigation, while the United Nations raised alarm over the country's worsening humanitarian crisis. The United States reaffirmed its support for Yemen's internationally recognized government and warned that Houthi attacks against Saudi Arabia and commercial vessels in the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden have consequences extending well beyond Yemen's borders.
Houthi forces have systematically targeted more than 7 Saudi-linked commercial vessels in the Red Sea, along with vital energy infrastructure in Yanbu, Jazan, and Abqaq. In addition, Houthis fired ballistic missiles and drones at territory held by Yemen's internationally recognized government, resulting in dozens of additional casualties over the past week. The link is crystal clear. The Houthis demonstrate active cooperation and alignment with Tehran. They engage in terrorist actions that increase instability in the region and threaten global commerce. The United States stands with the Republic of Yemen government against the Iran-supported Houthi terrorist threat.
The United Kingdom similarly condemned reckless Houthi attacks or actions, citing missile and drone attacks against Saudi Arabia, threats to international shipping, and the broader escalation across the region. London called on Iran to end its support for the Houthis and reaffirmed its commitment to Yemen's sovereignty, Saudi Arabia's security, and regional stability.
In recent weeks, we have seen a serious escalation in violence in Yemen and the wider region as a result of reckless Houthi actions. This includes drone and missile strikes against Saudi Arabia, attacks on international shipping in the Red Sea, and violations of Yemeni airspace by Iranian aircraft. Iran must cease its long-standing support for the Houthis, which threatens Yemen's stability. Last week, this Council delivered a clear message of condemnation for Houthi actions and a call for de-escalation. We urge the Houthis to focus on efforts to achieve peace and alleviate the suffering of Yemenis, rather than seeking to embroil Yemen in a wider regional conflict. We also remain deeply concerned by the Houthis' continued detention of 73 UN staff and many more NGO and civil society personnel, many who have been held for over 2 years. The Houthis must immediately and unconditionally release all those detained and allow humanitarian actors to operate safely and without obstruction.
UN Humanitarian Chief Tom Fletcher warned that the humanitarian situation is becoming increasingly severe. More than half of Yemen's population is facing acute food insecurity, while nearly 6 million people are approaching famine conditions. Fletcher said continued detention of humanitarian personnel and restrictions on aid operations are making it increasingly difficult to reach vulnerable communities. Bahrain and Pakistan condemned Houthi attacks on commercial shipping and called for respect for international law and the protection of maritime trade in the Red Sea and Gulf of Aden. The African group warned that renewed escalation could undermine peace efforts and push Yemen toward a broader regional conflict, citing attacks on civilian areas and displacement camps in Marib and damage to vital infrastructure at Mocha port. Armed Forces spokesperson Colonel Majd al-Nizali has warned that the military will respond decisively to the latest Houthi attack on Mocha port, saying civilian infrastructure and Yemen's vital interests cannot be treated as open targets. Nizali said the 6 ballistic missiles launched at Mocha port on Friday night would not go unanswered and warned of a deterrent response proportionate to the threat and the crimes committed. He said the armed forces would continue protecting Yemen's people, resources, territorial waters, and vital interests, while working to eliminate the Houthi threat and safeguard the country's sovereignty and security. Nizali stressed that Mocha port is a vital civilian economic and maritime facility, supporting trade and the flow of food and essential goods to Yemenis. He said repeated attacks on ports and civilian economic infrastructure threaten food security, damage livelihoods, and further deepen Yemen's humanitarian crisis. The spokesperson also praised the readiness of military units stationed along the western coast, saying they had demonstrated the capability to confront and deter further attacks. Armed Forces artillery entices targeted military reinforcements deployed by the Iran-backed Houthi militia to the western fronts of the city, according to a military source. The source said artillery strikes hit Houthi movements and reinforcements, including tanks, heavy military equipment, and artillery units in the areas of Sharab Junction, As-Sayahi, Hadran, and around the 35th Armored Brigade camp. The strikes came as military movements by the Houthis were detected in the same areas. The source said the Houthis had deployed additional forces and combat equipment in an apparent effort to strengthen their positions and escalate activity along the western front. The armed forces remain on high alert and are prepared to respond to any further Houthi movements or offensive attempts. The latest rhetoric from the Houthi militia reveals a growing contradiction between its threats and its calls for dialogue. In a recent post, Houthi spokesman Mohammed Abdul Salam defended the group's attacks while simultaneously signaling a search for a political exit. This shift, according to this report, reflects mounting military and political pressure on the militia.
The latest chapter in the Houthi militia ongoing charade is reflected in the post by the so-called spokesman for the Houthi terrorist militia, Mohammed Abdul Salam. Rather than presenting a political position, the post reveals the strategic predicament facing the terrorist group. The message can be read clearly: threats when the Houthis feel strong, and veiled appeals for an exit when they realize that the cost of their recklessness is beginning to turn against them. The first contradiction is that Houthi leaders claim their operations are carried out as part of what they call a legitimate response, while boasting in the same statement about targeting ships, military enforcement, and military camps. This is not self-defense. It's an explicit admission of aggression and an attempt to redefine piracy and armed attacks as an inherent right, an implementation of an Iranian agenda aimed at disrupting international maritime navigation and threatening global energy routes. On the issue of the truce, the militia is now attempting to portray the past years as evidence of its commitment to peace. Yet, Yemenis know that in Houthi practice, the truce was never a path toward peace. Instead, it became an opportunity to reposition, blackmail the international community, continue mobilization, escalate economic pressure, and plunder resources. Even more telling is the militia's shift between the language of threats and that of appeals. When the Houthis believe they are in the position of strength, they raise the level of their threats. But when they face deterrence and the balance of power shifts on the ground, the rhetoric suddenly turns down, seeking ways out. Threats calls for negotiations, the resumption of dialogue, and the intervention of mediators. This is where the next phase can be understood. The efforts of Presidential Leadership Council President Dr. Rashad Al-Alimi with the various international actors, along with the response of a number of ambassadors from countries sponsoring the peace process to initiatives aimed at ending the coup and restoring state authority across the country, confirm that the true nature of the Houthi project is becoming increasingly exposed. The militia is being revealed as a military arm used by Tehran to exert pressure in its regional and international conflicts, and as a threat extending beyond Yemen to the wider region and the world. Thus, the Houthis' call for dialogue does not demonstrate strength. Rather, it reveals predicament and confirms that the terrorist Houthi militia is facing fundamentally different military and political reality. The most important lesson is that peace cannot be built through blackmail, nor can it be protected by the militias of Iran's supreme leader. Peace is built by a national state, legitimate authority, and a unified army capable of defining rights and bringing an end to the suffering.
That's all for tonight. Thank you for watching. Have a good time.